This experience happened to my roommates and I in our second year of university. The city we went to school in was considered a very safe university town. The most we had heard of happening was drunk morons doing typical drunk moron things. This was also the first time that we were all really living on our own. First year residences are nice, but it's basically an extended summer camp, rather than a typical living situation. The four of us girls lived in a nice townhouse that never once had a creepy vibe or weird neighbours in the months we'd lived there. The only eerie part was that every weekend we were the only people who stayed in the complex. All of our neighbours either went home or stayed elsewhere until returning Monday for classes. This was never something we had given a second thought to, considering that was fairly normal for a uni town, especially because our complex was only made up of about 4 other townhouses. The complex was surrounded by walking trails and farm fields, which we loved. It was like our quiet spot, away from the chaos of college kids. There were a few farmhouses we could see from our backyard, but other than that, we were fairly secluded. The university was about a 20-minute bus ride away, which was never a big deal for any of us, especially because the rent was far cheaper here than in places that were within walking distance to the campus. Being 5'6", I was the tallest by a considerable amount. I was also the only one out of the group who had been in a handful of scary situations. Due to this, I was the only one, up to this point, who would lock the doors, windows, and garage, before leaving or going to bed. My roommates all grew up in a small, very safe town, so it was uncommon for them to lock the doors back at home. They were also incredibly kind and trusting, never considering hidden bad intentions. The night in question started very normally. We had planned on having wine and movie night. This was kind of like a weekly tradition for us. We would pick out some stupid movie, get takeout and get a little buzz after a long week of classes and work. At this point, it was early November, so we'd been doing this for several months with no issue. By 8:30, we had all settled on the couch in our living room and had started a comedy. With it being November, it was already completely dark outside. Other than our porch light, we could see from the small window at the very top of our door. None of us were tall enough to see anything out of that window anyway, so we relied entirely on our peephole. It took a great amount of effort for me to convince my roommates to check the peephole before opening the door. This was a talk we had after one roommate had opened the door for our neighbour's very drunk friend who threw up all over our main floor. Not long after ordering our takeout, we heard banging on our front door. Jess made a joke about how the delivery guy must have taken a helicopter to get here that quickly, especially considering the place we ordered from was very close to campus. It was not a typical delivery guy's knock either, but between the few glasses of wine and carefree attitude of the night, we really didn't pay it too much mind. It was my roommate's turn to pay this week. I'll call her Meg for the sake of the story. Out of the group, she is the smallest, barely 5 foot. She is also the most trusting person I think I've ever met. She ran up to her room to grab her wallet. This took at most 30 seconds. During this time, the banging continued and was getting more aggressive. I figured maybe it was cold, or he had other stuff to do, so we yelled up to get her to hurry. The banging continued to get harder, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. When she came back down, I told her to check the peephole before opening it, as she was usually the one to just open it up. She got to the door and looked out the peephole. She could barely reach it on a good day, so when she said she couldn't see anything, my other roommate and I got up to help. My second roommate, I'll call her Jess, is a very funny person. There are very few things that she would not turn into a joke. Jess got to the door before I did and looked out of the peephole, the person on the other side still banging away. When she turned to look at me, I knew something was wrong. She looked incredibly confused, a look I had rarely seen from her, as she was very clever. Within a second, she had gone back in for another look. This time, her face was not confused. She looked afraid. This made my stomach knot up. She is a horror movie fanatic, and she doesn't scare easily. "I think someone is covering the peephole," she whisper-shouted at us. This time I looked out of the peephole, seeing that, yep, something was covering the peephole. We could still see the porch light shining through the window at the top, so we knew it was not a case of it being too dark to be able to see what was going on. By now our other roommate, who I'll call Anne, had walked down the hall trying to find out what was going on. She was easily the drunkest of the four of us. Even sober though, she seemed to think she was invincible. "What is your problem? Open the door. The poor dude has his hands full," was Anne's wise idea. Jess and I explained what was going on. At this point, Meg, Jess and I all had a gut feeling that something was wrong. That is when Jess asked Meg to check the website she had ordered our food from. Meg had not placed the order. Between the wine and the silliness of the night, she had selected our food but did not finish the last step. The banging continued as our situation started to sink in. Anne still didn't seem to grasp what was happening and tried to unlock the door. "Stop!" I snapped at her. Immediately I knew it was too loud. For the first time, the person on the other side of the door spoke. "This is the police. Open the door now. We have a few questions to ask you." A man's voice practically growled back at us. This sobered me up right away. I looked over at Meg, who was already welling up, then at Jess, who had gone completely pale. At this point, Anne also realised something was not right and froze, which is the least Anne thing she could have done. The banging was getting increasingly harder, to the point we could physically see the door breathe with each hit. Meg took Anne upstairs, trying to calm each other down and check if there was a police car parked outside, and to make sure the windows were locked. Though it was hard to do, it was possible to get onto part of our roof that made it possible to get to Anne's window. We heard a window slam, immediately knowing that it had been Anne's window. Being a bit of a thrill seeker, Anne had taken out her window screen in order to sit on the roof. For some reason, this made what was happening very real. "Show me your badge, then we'll open the door," I yelled back. Instead of a response, it sounded like the guy started to kick the door. I told Jess to call the police and ask if they had any officer dispatched to our address. Jess was shaking so badly at this point that it was hard for her to dial. Now Meg had come back down from the stairs, sharing that there was no police car parked outside. Anne trailed behind her, standing on the stair landing, trying to get a look outside the window at the top of the door. At that moment, my blood ran cold, remembering that man at the door had said "we" and not "I." Jess had just come into the same realization. She sprinted to our back door, a large sliding glass door, which she double-checked that was locked. Thankfully, it had been. She drew the curtains as well, trying to minimize the chance of them seeing in. Within a minute, the knocking started at our back door as well. Thank God she had closed the curtains, because the idea of seeing whoever was doing this still gave me chills. "Uncover the peephole and show me your badge," I yelled again, trying to sound as intimidating as a young college girl could. We were met with silence, which was so much worse than the banging. "What is your badge number at least? Prove to us that you are the police," I screamed, trying to keep my voice from breaking. The only response I got back was a gravelly, "I can't do that." Jess had handed her phone off to Meg, who was sobbing now, trying to speak to the dispatcher. The banging now, coming from both sides of the house, must have been heard by the operator. "Is there someone trying to break in?" she asked Meg, obviously being unable to understand her. Meg frantically asked if police had been sent to our house. The answer we all knew by now was no. Meg babbled that at least 2 men tried to get us to unlock the door by impersonating a police officer. "Try to stay calm, stay on the phone with me. Police are on their way to your address," the operator told Meg. "How long will they be?" Meg asked back. "No more than 10 minutes, she responded. That made Meg cry harder, realizing just how long 10 minutes really is. The door was being hit so hard I worried it would break. Jess ran back towards our back door, making me worried that our kitchen window had been open. Trying to think, I put a chair under the doorknob and sat down hoping the door would hold. Jess came back to the front door, holding a kitchen knife and a fire extinguisher, which were the only things we had to protect ourselves. Anne, now sitting on the landing, flinched with each hit. Anne was farm tough, and had no issue dealing with animals 3 times her size. What was happening now, though, was entirely different. We had nothing to really deter whoever wanted in. No prods and no backup until the real police show up. Not like what she was used to. She grew up having family as her neighbours her whole life. If anything were happening, her Her uncles and grandfather were at her front door in a minute flat. Anne's "I'm invincible" attitude was long gone. She was now as scared as the rest of us, only having some wood and glass keeping these men out. Each hit to the back door made me expect whoever was there to break through the glass. "Open the damn door," the man yelled at us, not caring if we thought they were police anymore. Then it got very quiet again, which made me want to throw up. The only thing worse than what was happening was not knowing where the men were. The idea of both men moving to the back door made me absolutely terrified. If they really wanted to, it would be very little effort to smash through the plate glass. Instead, the knocking at the back door had completely ceased. Within seconds of that, the front door started being hit again. Trying to wrap my mind around why they would leave the easiest entry for a heavy wood, I realised the back door was visible to the main road. Whether they had seen a car or heard us talking to the police, they were smart enough to not want to be seen by anyone. Jess then said something that I had not thought of. "I don't think they want to rob us. There are so many houses that are empty. Why would they come to the only house with the lights on?" she hissed. My whole body went cold. I did not have an answer. All I could say was, "You're right." Meg clearly felt the same, because at this point, she was practically hyperventilating. The three of us stayed quiet for a minute, awful scenarios running through our heads. Anne moved back up the last few steps and out of our sight. The operator, who we'd forgotten was on speaker, spoke, which practically made me jump out of my skin. She must have felt how terrified we were and tried to calm us down. "The police are 2 minutes away. They have their sirens turned off and the lights are on. You should be able to see them very soon. Stay on the phone with me so I can confirm when they are outside for you," she said. The men outside were starting to seem desperate. The sound of glass shattering had me turning to the back door, fully expecting to go into a fence. But the door was still intact. Instead, our porch light, the only light illuminating our dark street, went out, which put two and two together for me, understanding that they had destroyed the only way we'd been able to identify whoever was on the other side. "Damn you little whores," a voice we hadn't heard before. Whoever was at the back door spat. This was worse than the initial speaker. It was full of so much hate and venom that it scared me more than the banging. He was so calm, intent on whatever his goal was. It didn't feel like how the first man had sounded. Up until this point, I could have convinced myself that he had wanted our valuables, but this voice made me understand that he wanted us. To this day, I've never heard a voice come close to that level of malice. It sounded like he wanted to inflict serious harm on us, and if he'd gained entry, I knew he would have. Somehow I wanted the first man to speak again, instead of whichever sick bastard had just spoken. I looked at Meg. I know how terrified I must have looked. Until now, I may have done a half-decent job at hiding how scared I was, but that voice ruined my ability to stay stone-faced. Meg looked like a scared little girl, and that made me panic. If they got in, there is nothing I would be able to do to stop them. Not for me, and not for my friends. We would have been at mercy of those monsters outside. Jess had practically stopped breathing. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. It was so quiet, it sounded like a gunshot when our mailbox opened. Anne ran back down the stairs. "I see the sirens. They're coming down the main road now," she whispered, hoping not to have the men hear. The same man spoke again, one more time, so slowly that I almost thought he was done after each word. In the same awful, calm voice, he read our letter addressed to the four of us. Our neighbours must have put it in today. She'd planned a potluck for the next week. None of us thought to check the mailbox after we had talked to her in the driveway this morning. Jess, Meg, Anne, OP. Those are nice names. I'll be back soon, girls. Then we'll have some fun. I felt tears rolling down my face. I hadn't realised I had started crying, but I knew he meant what he said. I tried to pull my mind out of the dark pit that sentence had sent it to, waiting, praying that the police had surprised them, hoping they would not get the chance to come back. The silence continued. None of us dared to speak, worried that we would not hear if they moved to another point of entry. Instead, the silence persisted for what felt like a lifetime. The operator was the first one to speak again. telling us that the police are out the front. She told us to stay in the house until the police knocked on the door. The kind woman stayed on the phone with us for several more minutes while the police searched around the area. Finally, the real police showed their badge to the peephole, before even knocking, trying not to scare us. The operator told us that we had done well and that we were in good hands now. We opened the door to be met by two kind-looking old police officers who we let in. Glass shards covered our front step from our porch light. It looked like it had been ripped out of the wall and smashed onto the concrete below. There were several police cars out front of our previously quiet home. The headlights on all of the cars were shining down to the street towards the walking trail. We spoke to the officers who took a report from us. They asked us to describe the night's event in detail. They asked us if we saw them at all, and we explained how the peephole had been covered and the light had been smashed before moving away from the door. The officers advised us to speak to our landlord about, at the very least, security cameras. The older officer then closed the pad he'd been writing in and looked up at us. He then spoke a phrase that made me understand how much danger we'd been in. "Look, if any of you were my daughters, I would have wanted the officer to tell her. If you can get out of your lease, do it. They know where you all live, and they also know the response time for us, especially after telling you all that he would be back." After that, they had asked if we had heard a vehicle. That was something I had not considered. We did not hear any type of motor until the police were there. Even when Meg and Anne had gone to look for a police car, they saw no other cars on the street at all. So likely, that meant they had come from the walking path, which would explain how they left without passing the police. The older officer of the two had a look that told me he had an idea of what was going on. He looked sad, which was worse than if he had looked scared. I knew he had seen the situation end far worse in the past. We pushed for an explanation, but were only told that this had been an issue years ago, but did not elaborate past that point. The officer stood up, exchanged a glance that I did not know how to read, and then spoke again. "We will have a cruiser parked in the driveway, as well as a plain car around the back. They will not have a chance to try again." They did not catch the men in those 2 more weeks we'd lived there. We had a few creepy things, but nothing close to this. The reality was they had not been caught, and they could come back any time. After this night, we spoke to our landlady, who was incredible. She owned several properties around the city, and when we explained what had happened, she let us move to an apartment closer to campus. She told us that our safety is more important than making a few $100s. She even left the house empty for many months in order to make sure cameras, better locks, and reinforced back doors were installed. Thankfully, they did not come back, and we were able to enjoy our new apartment without worrying. This is still so scary to me because of that voice. Make sure you lock everything, and check who's there before opening the door. My 5-pound Pomeranian, Killer Impulse, Kiki for short, certainly isn't mauling any home invaders for me. She has always been a fantastic alarm system. I adopted her 2 years ago, and I can confidently say that she is one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I spoil her as best I can on my librarian salary, putting all of my spending money towards vets, toys, and dog food. In exchange, she hunts bugs and rats that make their way into the dingy apartment. She provides me with endless entertainment, and she acts as a free delivery notification system. Kiki's always been exceptionally wary of strangers. It's a trait that makes socializing her pretty much impossible. But most of the time, I see it as a blessing. She always lets me know when someone's at our door, which makes me feel safer, even though our apartment building is in a pretty bad part of town. A few months ago, for example, a water pipe broke in between me and my neighbour's apartment, and the resulting leak ate a hole in the wall before the pipe was fixed. For a few days, I had to move my bookcase into the entryway to cover up the 6-inch diameter hole, through which I could see right into my neighbour's apartment, and vice versa. At least the hole was near the floor, and not at eye level, I guess. Maintenance took their sweet time responding to my request, and when they finally decided to show up, unannounced by the way, I was taking a nap on my couch. Before the 2 men even had the chance to knock, Kiki started yapping her little Pomeranian heart out. In doing so, she gave me time to get up, quickly make myself decent, and put her in my bedroom before the maintenance workers let themselves inside. Last Thursday, I came home after dark. The library was hosting their library card registration event, which always took place on the second Tuesday of the month. So I worked a longer day than usual. When I stepped into my apartment at around midnight, I almost tripped over a piece of wood in the entryway. You see, when maintenance fixed the wall, all they did was nail a plank over the hole, and it kept falling off no matter how many times I jammed it back into place. Grumbling to myself, I shoved the plank back into the wall and took a seat on the floor, petting Killer and apologising to her for my tardiness. She had a doggy litter box to do her business in and plenty of food, but I still felt bad about leaving her alone. I promised her an extra walk the following day. I also tried to give her a treat as an apology, but she didn't seem interested. In fact, she rarely seemed interested in her treats anymore, and rarely finished her meals. I brought this up at her most recent checkup, but she hadn't lost any weight and seemed perfectly healthy, so I figured her metabolism was simply slowing as she got older. After taking off my shoes, I fixed myself some tea and sat on the couch to watch a little television. One of my favourite shows was on, so I made myself comfortable. Kiki joined me after a few minutes, hopping onto the couch and flopping dramatically onto the cushions. It was nice to be able to relax with my dog and a hot drink after a long day at work. I almost drifted off to sleep before I heard that stupid piece of wood clattering to the floor again. Rolling my eyes, I ignored the sound. I would put it back in the morning. Half an hour passed, and I decided to get up. Usually on card registration days, I ended up falling asleep in front of the TV, so I thought I'd be responsible for once and brush my teeth before getting too cozy on the couch, not bothering to turn the TV off since I planned on coming straight back. I rose from my seat with a stretch and made my way towards the bathroom. Once I was within view of the entryway, something gave me a pause. The wooden board was still where I'd pushed it into the wall. I looked at it for a moment, wondering what had made the clattering sound. It was a little odd, but I didn't give it much thought. The walls were thin in my building, and the sound could easily have come from something like a shampoo bottle falling in my neighbour's apartment. I walked into my bedroom and changed into some sleepwear, smiling as I heard the little clicks of Kiki paws against the floor as she followed me into the bedroom. As I traded my librarian outfit for a t-shirt and sweatpants, I got a strange feeling in my gut. Have you ever overdone it in your morning coffee and gotten anxious for no good reason? Like something's triggering your flight or fight, even though there's nothing really apparently wrong. That's how I felt. I surveyed the dimly lit room, looking and listening for anything amiss, but there seemed to be nothing out of place. I knelt down next to Killer Impulse, trusting her nose more than my own senses. To my relief, she seemed perfectly at ease. I gave her a few good scratches behind her ears, and made my way back to the couch, Kiki still following me. I was fully awake at this point, though Kiki seemed alright. The nervous sensation stayed with me, making it impossible to relax. I kept thinking that I heard something, but when I turned the volume of the TV, I heard nothing at all. Every time I thought I heard something, I looked at Kiki, who was sleeping soundly on the couch next to me. Certainly if something strange was going on, Kiki would have alerted me by now, right? I mean, she barked when our neighbours across the hall had people over, so surely if something was going on in our own apartment, she would have noticed it, right? An uneasy hour passed. I was too on edge to fall asleep, but I was also too tired to enjoy the show. I realised at almost 2 AM that I had forgotten to brush my teeth after I changed. Once again, I got it from the couch, my loyal companion also rising from her resting spot to stay by my side. I bent down to give her a kiss on the top of her fluffy head, and then we walked together towards the bathroom. Kiki got there a little before me, stopping by the closed door and oddly beginning to wag. As I watched her tail swish back and forth, I realised that it wasn't just any wag either. It was the motion she made before getting a treat. Why was she making that motion in front of an empty bathroom? Kiki's always been exceptionally wary of strangers, She would never allow someone she didn't know to enter our apartment without letting me know. But what about some she did know? What about someone who had somehow been giving her treats every time they saw her, getting her used to their scent, to their presence? I stared at the bathroom door, my heart feeling as though it were about to beat right out of my chest. I had to get out of the apartment. "Damn," I said dramatically, faking an exasperated tone as best I could. "Left my wallet in the car again. I'll be right back, Kiki." I backed away from the door, keeping it in my sights until I'd made it out of the bedroom. Kiki followed me out, and once I'd made it to my apartment entryway, I grabbed my phone off the kitchen counter, scooped Kiki into my arms, and ran down the stairs to the lobby. Once I was there, I called the police to report a suspected intruder in my apartment. They found a man in my bathroom. He'd been standing in my tub with the shower curtain pulled close to obscure him. Although I had suspected a maintenance man or someone else who had worked in the building, I was surprised to see my reclusive neighbour being escorted to the cop car in handcuffs. As I watched him shamble his way towards the car, I noticed that his right hand was covered in scars. I assumed he'd been knocking loose the wooden plank between our apartments and reaching through to pet and feed Kiki. From the looks of it, she'd been happy to bite his flesh to ribbons at first, but he must have earned her trust over time. He must have been plotting the break-in for at least a few months, slowly wearing down my trusted security system to ensure that she wouldn't alert me to his presence. I also suspect that he was paying careful attention to my routine. He had planned his break-in for a night when I always came home tired, and he had likely chosen his hiding spot because he never heard me shower on the second Tuesday of the month. My neighbour wasn't the only thing the police found in my shower. He'd brought with him a duffel bag filled with a chloroform-soaked rag, duct tape, rope, and the thing that haunts me the most, a saw. Kiki and I have been staying with my parents for a few days while I get my nerves back under control. I don't blame her at all for what happened. She's still the best girl in the entire world in my eyes. But I don't think I can rely on her to be my personal alarm anymore. I'm thinking about moving to a better part of the city. It might cost me an arm and a leg, but I think Kiki and I both deserve a place where we can feel safe at night. Maybe somewhere with a built-in security system. About 5 years ago, I was living at home with my parents, and my twin brother was there too. Every morning at about 7 AM, we would both head out for a run. We had mapped out this giant loop that we would run. To make it a bit of a competition, I would run it in one direction, and my twin would run it in the other direction. That way we could run and stay focused. Part of this loop was on the main street of the city my parents lived in. On this main road, there were these shady apartments, kind of hidden by a bunch of trees. The direction I was running, the views of these apartments were obscured by a giant hedge bush, and I couldn't see the apartments until I was right in front of them. Out of my peripherals, I see a woman standing among the trees, staring at me. I immediately get the chills, and do not turn to face her, because I didn't want to be rude. So I run on, and forget about this a few minutes later. I pass my twin about 10 minutes later. He's going in the opposite direction as I. I get home, and my twin isn't back yet, so I go about the rest of my morning routine, including taking a shower. I get out of the shower, and my twin still isn't back yet, and I'm starting to get a bit worried. An hour after I'd gotten home, he's still not back, so I call him. He tells me he's on his way back, and he has something he needs to tell me and my parents. He finally gets home, and tells us that as he was running in front of those apartments, he saw a woman hanging from the trees. As soon as it's obvious he's seen her, a man comes sprinting from the apartments, wailing and screaming, "No! I can't believe she did this!" and grabs her body and lays her on the ground and starts performing CPR. It's obvious he is her husband. My brother calls the local police, and they dispatch an ambulance and police officers. My brother has to stay for questioning, as a witness report, and all that jazz. He is obviously troubled by it, since he was going the opposite way that I was running. He didn't have a hedge obscuring his view, and got straight on view with the woman hanging there. It's still hard for me to believe that the woman I saw staring at me, out of my peripherals, was dead the entire time. I do find it very sketchy that the husband came running out as soon as it was obvious that someone had discovered the body. That is a bit too convenient, if you ask me. But I don't want to say this man killed his wife without any evidence. My brother is never followed up with by the police, leading me to believe the death was ruled as suicide. I just still can't fathom that if I would have turned to face this woman, I would have discovered her about 20 minutes earlier than my twin had, and it deeply troubles me that I didn't.